Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This week's Torah portion is called Deut Hanan, and the word Hanan is related to the idea of comforting. And indeed, the Haftorah portion for this Shabbat is from Isaiah chapter 40, and it begins Nachamu, Nachamu. And these are the same root that relates these words. The idea is comfort and compassion and strength. The Et Hanan includes the second telling of the Ten Commandments as God gives them again to Moses. Moses shares them with the Israelites, and they are very slightly different from the Ten Commandments that we read at uh, Exodus, in the book of Exodus, at what we heard at Mount Sinai. And one of the differences has to do with Shabbat. Do we shamor Shabbat, observe Shabbat? Do we zachor Shabbat, remember Shabbat? And in fact, we do both. The Ten Commandments are followed by the Shema in the same portion. Little few verses separate them, but the Shema. Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. You shall love Adonai, your God, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And it might be said that the Shema itself and Ve'ahavta, to remember the words, Vishinantam levanecha, and teach them to your children, actually serves as a commentary on the first commandment. I am Adonai your God, who led you out of the house of bondage to be your God. So, what does it mean to have this relationship with God? Well, God gives us teachings, and we follow them and teach them to our children. And while that may seem like God is the master, which in fact God is, and we are passive, in fact, our activity in following the commandments and teaching the commandments is what brings us into a partnership with God. And it's not just God's protection that benefits us, but it is the result of our obedience, a good, a moral, a just and compassionate life that we, while being obedient and following God's will, of course, brings us merit, but also we benefit ourselves and our families and our communities by being good and just and compassionate and kind. So we can see that the Shema and V'ahavta, which we say twice a day, as V'ahavta tells us, bind them as a sign upon your hand and speak of them on your way, when you're at home, when you get up in the morning, and when you lie down at night. These are the bywords of not just our prayer, but what we teach to our children, that loving God, being loyal to God, leads us to a life of goodness. So we can see, perhaps as we perhaps haven't thought of before, that this portion contains within itself its own commentary, that the Shema, V'ahavta, are commentaries on the covenant with God that is the Ten Commandments. And the Haftorah this week is from Isaiah, Nachamu, Nachamu, and this Shabbat is known as Shabbat Nachamu. It is the first of 7 Shabbatot between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah. And these Haftorot are all from Isaiah, but they are Haftorot that bring words of comfort After Israel has sinned, after Israel has gone astray and receives the consequences of those sins and those transgressions, that punishment, divine punishment, or perhaps the natural punishment as a consequence of bad behavior. In either case, once we have served that, God is forgiving. God redeems us from our suffering. God brings us back because even though we may be deserving of punishment, God still loves us. We are still bound in covenant with God, and God has bound God's own self in covenant with us. And so these portions, which generally are in the context of coming back from the exile in Babylonia, having served our time, as it were, God comforts us. God brings us compassion. Nachamu, Nachamu Ami. Comfort, O comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem. Declare to her that her term of service is over. Her iniquity is expiated. She has received at the hand of the Lord double for all her sins. And now a voice rings out, clear in the desert, clear a road for God. Israel and God will be reunited. God's promises of redemption are true and real. Be comforted. Present hard times will not last. And when we think of the times that we are living now, where can we find comfort? How can these words of comfort bring to us a sense of optimism about the future? How can they strengthen us where we are today? If we are united, not only do we comfort us, but our unity hastens God's comfort for us. When we are united, we are strong. We can bear our burdens. We can rebuild. We can not just survive, but thrive. The Ten Commandments, those commandments of relationship with God and commandments of morality in our own communities, are the foundation of our Jewish identity and the foundation indeed of all the mitzvot in the Torah. But chief among them is this relationship. We live in relationship with the Holy One. And the Holy One, no matter what we do, endures in relationship with us. So be comforted. Be comforted. Know that as we stand together, as we hold hands, either literally or figuratively, as we face our troubles, this virus, as we support each other, so God will support us. And this message of comfort initiates this period as we prepare for the High Holy Days and reminds us, where is our strength? Our strength is in our unity as a community, as a people. Our strength is in our covenant with our God, unbreakable, eternal. No matter what happens in the short run, the presence of Adonai will appear. And as at Sinai, we may not all experience the presence of God in the exact same way, but we will experience the presence of God, the presence of a sense of holiness, a life of meaning, of larger purpose, of longer timelines than just our own lives. From our ancestors through to our descendants. Bind these things as a sign. Teach them to your children. God is with us, and God will comfort us as a people. God will comfort each of us if only we will be comforted. If we let God in, if we seek a life of holiness, if we take the commandments to heart with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our might, then the future is a long, long road ahead of us. We do move towards an ultimate time, so our tradition teaches, an ultimate time, a world to come, a better world, a more perfect union, to borrow a metaphor, to borrow that phrase. And if we keep that in mind, then we are indeed strong and blessed. May these thoughts guide you this Shabbat and in the coming weeks. May you reach out to your neighbors, to your friends, embrace your family, embrace the holiness that is being a Jew. Shabbat Shalom.